Okay, that looks promising. All right, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Nate Schutta. I'm here with my good friend Brian Sletten, and we're going to have, I'm sure, a interesting rambling conversation that will only occasionally dive into food and things like sous vide. But Brian, I want to welcome you here today. So why don't you tell people who you are and how it is you found your way into my clutches on a random Monday morning?
Well, my name is Brian Sletten. I'm an independent software consultant. I currently live in Auburn, California, which is just outside of Sacramento. I like to torment Nate with pictures of the farmer's market in January and February. Well, he's frozen in the tundra. But I'm originally from the DC area, and I grew up overseas. I lived in the Philippines, Germany, and Japan. And several years ago, met Nate through the No Fluff Just Stuff conference series, and
And
have
and he's
enjoyed
and he's
spending
still
time together.
yeah, he hasn't gotten rid of me quite yet. So that's always a win. And his lovely wife and I are birthday buddies, so that works out well
That's
for
right.
me too. So
That's right.
yeah, Brian, you always strike me as I have these friends who seemingly have a career that has spanned more than their actual age, and you're one of those people who, on such a regular occurrence, will throw something out. I'm like, wait, what? You used to live where? And you did what? And I mean, I don't even know which one to pick on first, but I know we were in a restaurant at some point pre-pandemic, and you bought some kind of crazy drink, and you said, "Oh, it reminded me of I want to say high school in Japan." Is that right?
Oh, yeah. It was in that was the ramen place we went to
Yes.
in
I don't even remember what city we were in.
in Columbus.
Oh,
Um,
okay, got it.
yep. And it was this little raku. They call it raku something or other. I don't remember the name, but it's got the marble in it, and you gotta
Yes.
push the marble down. Yep, that was high school Japan. They had all kinds of crazy stuff like that.
So how did you end up in Japan for high school, and how many years were you there?
I was there for 3 years.
Okay.
My dad worked for the embassy,
Okay.
and I lived in Yokohama, and that's part of the big megalopolis uh, sprawling out of Tokyo. But it's about an hour away from downtown Tokyo. Um, and it was a fantastic experience. I went to an international school there, and that was 10th through 12th grade.
Nice. Now, I know you said you've lived a lot of places and you've been on both coasts. Is there a place that you're like, yep, I'd really rather, I want to live there again someday? I mean, I think you're in a pretty ideal location right
Yeah,
now, to be honest with you.
yeah, not really interested in moving at the moment.
Can't imagine why.
We're at about 1,400 feet above the pollution and below the snow, and
Exactly.
year-round farmers market. And no, I mean, I miss the East Coast. One thing we don't have a lot of here are seasons. And in fact, just yesterday, I was talking to somebody from Minnesota who said
We're everywhere.
he was complaining about the weather here,
No.
and he said he missed seasons. So
But see, the beauty of where you live is if you want to get one of those seasons, you can just drive to it.
oh yeah,
So
Tahoe is about an hour and a half away.
right. So if you need the snow, you just drive to it, and then you drive away from it, which I
Right.
really wish I could do. That's the downside of where I live. I don't get to drive away from the snow in January.
And the ocean's 2 hours the other way. So
Yeah, so I will admit my family. I mean, I like Minnesota generally. I don't like Minnesota
mhm.
in January, February, December's I could take or leave. But I do wish we had mountains, and I wouldn't mind if the ocean was a little closer. To be
Mhm.
fair. So there, as we were talking before we started today, I play golf out in Bandon, Oregon, most years, and I love it because the courses are right on the ocean. There's this beautiful place called Bandon Dunes, and it's something you just don't get to experience when you're in a landlocked state. So, how did you end up in this crazy software world? I mean, you have a very diverse background. You've done a lot of fascinating things. What led you to say, what I want to be when I grow up is somebody that plays with computers?
I think I could pretty much credit my father with that. When we were in the Philippines, my brother was on a swim team, and we went to Hong Kong for a swim meet. And one night after dinner, we were walking around kind of a downtown commercial area. It's very modern and open office kinds of things, and there were computers that were visible. And he's a psychologist, and he'd done some work on statistics on computers and for his PhD, and he just kind of painted a picture that this was going to be an exciting part of the future. And so when we moved to Germany, we got an Atari 800, and my brother and I spent hours typing in bytecodes in the back of magazines for the youngins who never did that. Literally, like 15 to 20 pages of hex bytecodes you would type in, and if you screwed one up, you'd have to go back and find which one it was. But that was before internet, and even, we originally didn't have a floppy disk on it. Eventually
Sure.
we did. And I remember the big upgrade to 48K. That was exciting. So,
Are you old enough to remember when we used to actually have stuff on cassette? You
oh
remember
yeah,
that?
yeah. We had a cassette
Oh yeah.
on that.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
actually, so surprisingly, when I was in the Philippines, I didn't spend a lot of time on them, but I think sometime after the Hong Kong trip, um, I went to an international school, so it was a lot of corporate money and stuff in it. They actually had a computer lab in the late
Nice.
70s, and my kindergarten class or whatever got to go play around on some kind of driving game or something.
What about Oregon Trail? Did you have Oregon Trail at that time?
I never really got into that.
Really? How's
I,
that
I
possible?
I don't know. I was doing other stuff.
My cat says hi, by the way. He apparently wants to be part of the live stream today. So it's always fun when our feline friends decide to get involved. Of course, he doesn't like to be told where to go either. He just wants to have control over the entire desk. I think the
He's a
other
cat.
cats. I think the other one's over my shoulder too. So we got both of our furry friends. At least on my side. I know your puppy dogs are in the other room, so it's totally fine. Totally fine. So what are you working on these days? What's got you excited, fired up? What part of technology do you think is the future? You always seem to be well ahead, in my opinion, of kind of where folks are.
I had kind of a funny experience last December. Jay Zimmerman, the No Fluff owner, sat down and said, "Hey, what do you want to talk about next year?" And I've been doing a lot of machine learning and deep learning training in the last couple of years, and I enjoy it. But at this point, I've probably trained about 3,000 people, and wanted to do something else. And I like to have my talks fall under some kind of umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
And I just sort of picked a fairly big tent umbrella, and I called it modern software. But I wanted to focus on things that had meaningful impact, right? Things that were not just shiny objects that were actually changing our industry. And I didn't think a whole lot about the connections between them, but I just tossed a bunch of things in there. And so that included, obviously, WebAssembly, inside and outside the browser. It included LLVM, which if you've done only JavaScript, you probably won't have run into it directly, but it's a compiler architecture that was designed to be modular. Prior to Clang, GCC was the dominant C compiler, and it still is in the Linux space. But it's a fairly monolithic structure, and it was hard to reuse. It's treated more as a series of applications, whereas LLVM was always a library, and therefore could be linked into other applications. But as a modular architecture, it allows you to think about the three main stages is like the parsing stage, the optimization stage, and then the emitting of the backend stage. And most new languages like Swift and Rust and Julia are all LLVM based. So they only have to write the parser part of it, and then they can reuse all the existing optimizations that are available. So like dead code elimination and loop unrolling and constant propagation and things like that. And those are things that if you were historically creating your own language, you'd have to do all that yourself.
Right.
So we get the reuse of that. But then the backend allows you to emit things to target particular platforms. And so, for example, Rust is a LLVM-based language, and it will, by default, emit the backend for the platform you're running on, but you can download the backends for Linux or Windows and do that. It's part of why Apple's transition to ARM is going to be so trivial, because they hired the guy who created LLVM and switched their toolchain over years ago. So now it just becomes a question of recompiling in a lot of ways. But they've actually found interesting ways to use it for like 3D graphics. You have a shader language that's compiled down to run on a GPU, but the GPUs have very different capabilities. And one of the dominant themes in this collection of technologies that I think are going to change our industry is we don't have time to rewrite stuff, right? And we don't have time to write stuff that is super aware of the environment that it's running in. So, as an example, Apple would write the GLSL shader language once, and then they would emit the instructions to run on like an iOS device, which has only 16-bit floating point precision. But the same app could be retargeted and optimized for other, the iPads and Mac Pros and things like that. So LLVM was part of that. Linked data is part of that. I mean, I've talked about the semantic web for a long time. But it's quietly here. 45% of the index web page has semantic markup in it. Google, Yahoo, Yandex, Bing are all encouraging people to put embedded JSON-LD in their emails and documents. It's how you share information with the world. Knowledge graphs are ascendant. If you look around, there's a lot of interest in knowledge graphs, which are really just another way of saying encoding your understanding of your domain in machine processable ways, which is exactly what the ontologies and taxonomies that we've been talking about. So helping people understand that given the explosive growth in data, we don't have time to sit down and have 4-week integration initiatives.
Right.
You have to be able to absorb information, even if you've never talked to the people before, which seems impossible, but you do it on a daily basis when you point your browser someplace it's never been. And it's just about using standards to represent information in that way. So WebAssembly, LLVM, Rust as a language, it materially strengthens us against security vulnerabilities, gives us a very fast, safe language that allows you to move things from runtime errors to compile time errors. And initially it's kind of annoying. I liken it a little bit to, as a teenager, there aren't really a lot of expectations about you. Like some teens are more mature than others, but sort of we naturally mature into more disciplined adults. Hopefully,
well, we hope.
We hope. And so as a programmer, Rust forces you to be a little bit more of an adult, like to communicate, to say what your intentions are and what you need out of the situation, right? And again, that you get a little annoyed with that initially, but once you get past it, being an adult in your 20s and 30s is actually a lot of fun.
Right.
And as a consequence, Rust is an extremely popular language that's gaining a lot of traction at Apple, and Microsoft is committing to it hard. IPFS is another technology, the Interplanetary File System. It's a wild concept, but they are literally saving the web and putting down anti-censorship, resilience, using content-based addressing to find stuff so that if people move it around, location-based identity isn't a big thing anymore. And so again, I tossed all these things in there, and it wasn't until the one No Fluff show I got to do in Minneapolis before the pandemic that I realized that they were all related.
Right.
And I found myself talking about why Rust was interesting to me because of its connection to WebAssembly, but its connection to WebAssembly was largely about the fact that it was LLVM based. And so rather than emitting x86 code, it would emit WebAssembly code instead, right? And it really came down to a series of technologies that were all proven. So it's not like you had to trust me that these were going to be interesting technologies. In and of themselves, they've all been proven to work. But in the interplay, they become extremely interesting. As an example, so our big issues are we can't translate the extra density of Moore's law into faster computers directly. So we had to translate them into multi-core systems, but that then forced developers to change how they write software, and they kind of sucked at it. And in part because, particularly as Java developers, we were told for a decade, you don't have to worry about that. The container will take care of that for you, right? And so now that's prodding us to move towards functional programming and immutable data structures and things like that, so that it's easier to write effective, efficient code to take advantage of these resources. But the world is very different right now,
Right.
with phones and iPads and watches and Internet of Things devices, cloud computing environments, bare metal computing environments, edge computing environments. We simply don't have the ability to stop and write feature testing code like, oh, am I running in an environment with this kind of GPU and this many CPUs? And right, we need that stuff to be generated for us. And one of the coolest papers I read this summer was a machine learning project to analyze what order to apply LLVM optimizations in, so the same application could be changed to either be faster or more power efficient.
Wow.
And so I think, you know, the three main things that tie together here are technology needs longer life cycles. We can't be throwing stuff away as fast as we do. We have to accept this just overwhelming mountain of data that's coming at us. By 2025, they're anticipating 145 to 175 zettabytes of information being stored online, and a zettabyte is a trillion gigabytes.
Oh, God.
And so all that data has to be stored and linked, and you know, all these sorts of things that are going on. That's why our traditional ways of building APIs and doing data integration aren't going to work.
Right.
So we need technologies that allow us to deal with this onslaught of data. And ultimately, it's all about paying less for what you need to get done.
Sure.
And, you know, I think I'm recognizing these things in part because you referenced some of the stuff I did early in my career. I worked on the first commercial whole Earth visualization environment 25 years ago. So think Google Earth, but pre-Google Earth 25 years ago. And we had terabytes of terrain data and hyperspectral imagery and simulating satellites. And the last project I worked on was pulling video frames off of Predator drones, and my office mate would warp them into our 3D environment. And all of that required Silicon Graphics workstations. Right. Within 2 years, they ran on PCs with a GPU. And
Right.
so that was sort of my first indication of how important hardware is towards improving these things. And then a couple of years later, I worked for a company called Parabon, where we built an internet distributed computing platform. So like SETI at home, but preemptive Java-based system. We had a gene sequence comparison system that would scale linearly. At the time, people like Celera Genomics were using Beowulf clusters, so they had to set those all up themselves and buy the computers and network them and pay the electricity and air conditioning and things like that. Whereas we were, in essence, just renting time on people's computers.
Right.
And you know, that got me thinking, like, certain problems really do well in different environments. And so we had a NASA researcher from Greenbelt, Maryland, who would do thermospheric simulations that would take 9 months on his equipment. He ported it from his platform to our platform in a week, launched his job from Greenbelt, Maryland, flew to San Francisco, got to his hotel, and got his results. And so, you know, computation has a cost. And if you put it in the wrong place or try to do it in the wrong way, you're going to end up paying more. And so if you look at microservices, that's a response to architecture becoming a bottleneck, but it's also a way allowing you to more cost effectively use your infrastructure by scaling to meet actual needs, not like lump everything together and have sort of imbalanced scale. And serverless computing is again about paying only for what you need. And so with all of these things happening and the increased heterogeneity of our destination of our code, we need tools that make it easier to absorb data and to put the code and the data where they need to be to effectively solve problems, but also to do it cost effectively.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're talking about to me is one of these conversations I've had with my grad students, which is sort of this democratization of technology. I
Hmm.
mean, when we were first playing around with this stuff, you had to buy a compiler, from somebody, and that would be in some cases thousands of dollars. And now, what buy a compiler? That's crazy. And you think about how much technology has changed in our career. It's pretty remarkable
Hmm.
to see that switch, and I think it, very much a positive, but to your point, going from this very expensive proprietary high end specialized hardware to, oh no, it'll just run on my laptop. Then you think about what they used to put people on the moon, and that's like a Raspberry Pi now.
Hmm.
It's crazy.
Google Earth has been compiled to WebAssembly and runs cross platform in a browser now, right? So
Isn't that crazy?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just amazing, and I think like, what is this going to look like in 20 years? We were talking about this before we started, but road trips when we were growing up, road trips where you had to stare out the window and read a book, and now you have your iPad and your phone and your laptop, and so you're watching movies or you're scrolling through Twitter or whatever. So just think like, what are our grandkids going to see? It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, even already culturally, there's a difference between our generation and the next generation. Like, we still think about getting online and being offline,
Sure.
and for them, there's no distinction, right? They're
Right.
they're always online, and 5G is just going to make that more ubiquitous. So I was talking to somebody just yesterday about the importance of offline apps, and while that's still something you need to consider, not for long,
Sure.
right? Because we are just going to be ubiquitously available online, um, which has its negatives as well.
Yeah, and I think that gets lost sometimes. There is a benefit to being disconnected that I
Hmm.
think we struggle with. That, I was actually talking with one of my students about this on Saturday, I think it was, and I was telling her that, yeah, sorry, I missed your email, but I had some chunks of time here in the last week where I just didn't have connectivity. And she said, oh, that sounds great. And I'm like, it's kind of terrifying to me because I'm so used to having my phone be able to just do things for me. And when you have no bars at all and you realize if something happens, if I need a tire changed and I can't figure out how to do it, I'm at the mercy of whoever happens to be driving by. And,
Hmm.
but then you think about it, it wasn't that long ago that was just reality. Like you didn't have connectivity, you didn't have cell coverage, so it hasn't been that long, really. I mean, in our lifetimes, we certainly had those experiences where you actually had to know how to get from point A to point B. Your phone wasn't going to tell you how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I when I first started doing the no fluff thing, we would parachute into a
Yeah.
town. I would have to print out
Right?
MapQuest directions, at the beginning, and then I think it was in Chicago, 4 or 5, I don't remember, some number of years ago. I had just upgraded my phone after a long time, and it had some ridiculous amount of storage on it. And so I had put, rather than a couple hundred songs on it, I put like 15,000 songs on it or something, right? And so I'm driving along, Siri's giving me directions, to the hotel. I'm playing music, and then a song came on that I didn't recognize. Like, I recognized the voice, but I didn't recognize the song. And then, just without thinking, I asked Siri what the song was, and she's like, "Oh, it's Emmett Swing something or other," um, and then went back to giving me directions. And I thought, when did having this AI agent, ubiquitously giving me directions from satellites while playing me, one of thousands of
Right?
songs, when did that happen?
Right? Now, it's pretty remarkable. You think about how quickly we've gone to just ask your phone. My son was asking me something yesterday, and I'm like, I'm not sure. And he's like, you have your phone in your hand. Just ask it. And you and I've had this conversation too, but we still think about interacting with computing devices as keyboard, mouse. My son just asks his phone things all the time,
Hmm.
and I do that a lot too, to be fair. But it for him, that's almost become like input device one is I speak to it, and if that
Hmm.
doesn't work, okay, fine, I guess I'll use the keyboard. It's amazing to see how quickly that has changed. And again, these tools haven't been around that long. I mean, my son was born right around when the iPhone came out. In fact, I actually used him as an excuse to buy an iPhone because I said, look at all these pictures I'll
Good
be able
one.
to store on there. Well,
Good one.
yeah, I mean, it worked kind of, my wife didn't say no. So, the
There
system
are
worked.
easier ways, easier and cheaper ways to get iPhones,
Well,
but
there are, but
whatever.
that was my theory at the time, right? Is this way I can have a bunch of photos of my kid. And to that end, I have thousands and thousands of photos that I would never have had, but for the fact that my phone is with me all the time and it has a really good camera on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I've got pictures from my childhood up in albums up here, and just the simple of act of having to go up and fetch them. It's something I don't do very often, but if I'm on a plane or in a hotel or something, I'll frequently scroll back through, the last several years of
Totally.
memories and things, and it's wild. Even before I moved to Los Angeles, and when I lived in Northern Virginia, there was an ad for Quest at the time. It may have been national. I don't know if you saw it as well. A guy walks into kind of like a dusty old hotel, like in rural Texas or something, and he's like, what you got on the TV? And the woman's like, every movie ever made ever.
Yep.
And it was before that was reality, and it just seemed, oh, come on, that can't be possible. But just this past weekend, I was, searching through Netflix and YouTube and CBS All Access and HBO Max, and I thought, I pretty much have access to anything.
Just about.
And there's still nothing I want to watch.
Well, that's a great point, because you think back to our childhood, or even our young adulthood, and we were under the tyranny of the schedule. What movie's coming on at 10? That's the movie I can watch. And while that certainly wasn't ideal in the sense that you were stuck with whatever the television schedulers decided you could watch, there is that paradox of choice that kicks in on the other side, which is, and this happens to us fairly frequently, we'll sit down to watch a movie together as a family, and my wife likes to joke, well, Nate, why don't you go start that process, because it's going to take you about 45 minutes to find something. And she's not wrong, because you scroll through, again, your Netflix, your Hulu, whatever, and then you're like, well, okay, nothing there. Maybe I should buy a movie. And so then you start looking through there, and you're like, all right, yeah, there's not a lot of content sometimes, even though we're flooded with all this content.
Yeah, and I lament, technology is not without its consequences, and there was a unification. Right. Every day you'd go to school the next day and it'd be like, oh, did you see that on TV last night? And we all kind of watched the same stuff, and we all had sort of this shared connection. And that's, we're tribal now in terms of what we watch as much as anything else now. So
I do think it's interesting to be able to just stream and binge, which we clearly couldn't do. We're going back through Friends to show Ev what Friends was all about, and first thing, it's just a good reminder to me how funny that show actually was. Just great writing, great ensemble cast. But we had to explain to Everett that when we were watching this, you had to wait a week, or an entire summer before you got another episode. And here we're just, well, how many do we want to watch tonight? Do you want to watch 4? Do you want to watch 8? How long do we want to spend on this? And, there are some advantages to that. Like, I think at some point over the winter here, I might have to try to go back through like Game of Thrones, because to see it all kind of in one motion, I think would help you see some things you'd miss. But to your point, we also miss out on that sort of shared aspect of everybody watched this show last night and we talked about it the next day. That's gone.
Yeah. Just think about Empire Strikes Back, right? When that came out and ended on the cliffhanger.
Right.
I don't want to give away any spoilers. But for like a year, people would argue about, is he, isn't he? What's going on? Yeah, and I think the streaming nonsense where we have to have 12,000 subscriptions now is a consequence of the DVR time shifting, right?
Right.
Up until then, the trade-off was you had to watch commercials, but you got to watch TV for free.
Right.
And once we're like, yeah, no, we don't have to watch commercials anymore, they're like, okay, TV's not free anymore.
Right. And I'm fine with that, except for the fact that each one of these streaming services has something I want. And at a certain point, you're like, I can't justify another $15 a month to watch one show. Like, please no. And that's part of the debate that I know we're going to have here at some point is, what are we going to trim? Because you can't justify all of it. And I don't know, but it is interesting to see where some of those things are landing, and that contest for who can come up with compelling reasons to subscribe. Mandalorian for sure is part of the reason why I hopped on the Disney Plus bandwagon. I'm delighted I did, but
did you watch the Did you watch the behind the scenes episode?
I haven't yet. I watched a few of them, but I'm not caught up on the
Well, no,
behind
no,
the scenes.
just last night or this weekend sometime we watched. It focuses on the directors, and
Yeah, I did see that one.
focuses. That was really cool. I
Wasn't that neat?
enjoyed that. Hmm.
Yeah, it's very cool to see what goes into that and just that sort of vision they all had and how you keep that actually staying coherent despite multiple voices coming through. And it's
Hmm.
that's very very cool stuff. But
Well, and particularly the difference in background. I mean, because like you think of Star Wars as being, well, modulo the prequels, a fairly coherent
right,
vision, right? Um, but when you realize that this show that involves like 24-minute episodes or whatever it is, had directors as diverse as Taika Waititi, Bryce Dallas Howard, Mike. I can't remember his last name. He did Dope.
hmm
These are
right.
very different backgrounds, and yet they've come together and blended into this compelling content.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think it's remarkable, and a lot of credit goes to Favre there for putting that all together. But so, how you surviving the pandemic times? We were chatting a little about that before we got started here, but how you doing? How you holding up?
Um, in the grand scheme of things, I don't have anything to complain about. Um, uh, you of all people will be amused the fact that I'm kind of glad I'm not down in Beverly Hills anymore. Things would have been a lot harder down there.
Sure.
So it's a small mountain town, access to fresh food. We've got great local farms and CSA programs. My wife's a fantastic cook. For
She
the
is.
first 6 or 7 months of the pandemic, she committed to not repeating anything,
Wow.
and basically she kept to it. And so, I mean, she's pulled out Thai and Vietnamese and Mexican and all kinds of wonderful things. We've got a nice backyard. The dogs can run around, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to shift on a dime and do remote training and teaching and writing a book and everything. So um, I really can't complain about anything. And it's rough thinking about people who have to go to work or
Right.
are living alone, or um, it would have been a lot harder in a
Yeah.
different circumstance. So
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate is that, I have a family. I've got my wife, I've got my 13-year-old, I still get to connect with my friends and things like this. But I have some colleagues that are single, and I just think, boy, this would be much more difficult if you were completely by yourself and were kind of cut off in many ways from friends and family. And so no, I'm with you there. I'm very very thankful, very lucky. But have you picked up any pandemic habits or routines that you hope you can continue once we get through this sometime, probably in 2021?
staying home. Yeah, I mean, prior to this, million and a half miling just on one airline,
Yeah,
um, and being home is nice. So I'm hoping to do more remote work.
sure.
But I mean, I also I miss going places and seeing things. I've a show to tie all the threads together. I've really enjoyed the show Somebody Feed Phil on
Yeah,
Netflix.
yeah. You're telling me about that.
It's it is just a delightfully charming. I mean, it's like uh, Anthony Bourdain's Never Reservation meets Mr. Bean, right? It's he's a fish out of water in a lot of these places.
Sure.
He's the guy who wrote Everybody Loves Raymond.
Oh, okay.
So he's a likable guy. He loves people. He loves experiences. He loves to eat. And so I mean, he goes around to London and Singapore and Seoul, Korea, and Mississippi Delta, and just all these places, and either hooks into the local food scene with critics or he knows people there, and it's beautifully shot. Like, it's just the cinematography is amazing. But it's just such a breath of fresh air in general, until I stop and think, God, I hope all these restaurants are still in business.
Oh
You know,
man, I hear that. Is
but
there is there a place you're really excited about getting back to? Is there any place you're really looking forward to for next? I mean, again, hopefully next year.
London, Berlin, Oslo, Copenhagen. Yeah,
I mean, I know
all
what restaurant I want to go to when this is all said and done. There's no getting
yeah,
around it. In fact, Christine
yeah.
and I were talking about this. Oh, this is maybe a month or so ago, right before our anniversary. She's like, I think next year for anniversary, you're gonna have to take me to Core in London. And I'm like, all right, that's that. You don't have to twist my arm on that one, but yeah,
Yeah,
no, I
I'd love
hear
to
you.
get back to Tokyo. It's I've been there since college, and I absolutely love Japan, and would love to go back. There's no place in the world like Tokyo. If you get a chance, you should definitely go.
Yeah, I missed Tokyo. We did an APJ hook a couple years ago. I missed the Tokyo stop, but I very much want to get back on that side of the planet. I actually do have an event coming up Wednesday, I guess my time for them, but so I'm excited about that, but I'm also missing the fact that I'm not actually going to be there. So
Right.
no, I'm with you. I do enjoy being in my own bed. I do like the fact that I've had a lot more time to do other things when you're not spending 400 hours on an airplane. That actually gives you some time back. But by the same token, I miss seeing my friends in these places. I miss just the experiences, the being there part. But eventually, fingers crossed that 2021 will switch things around for us. But so, is there any place that you love to go on vacation? Do you have this is one thing I know we haven't talked about
What
before.
what is this word that you're using?
Vacation. Have you heard of this concept? No.
Is that like when you have a conference to go to and
You take a couple days maybe with
yeah?
you and your wife. Yeah.
Um, I don't
I mean,
know.
you're a pretty busy dude. I don't see you spending a whole lot of downtime in my experience with you over the last 15 years.
Um, one of our favorite places was the North Shore of Kauai, up in Hanalei Bay. Although there's a lot, as you know, there's a lot of weird stories in my life,
Yes.
weird coincidences, and one of my favorite ones was we were there, and my wife's family, and we're all kind of hanging out, and I often work when I'm there, as you might imagine. And that particular day, there was some blog post that went viral about how rest was ivory tower nonsense and blah 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 blah. I don't remember what it was, and because I speak about it a lot, I was sent that link about 12,000 times.
Sure.
Um, and I thought about responding, and I thought about saying something, and I thought, whatever, I'm not going to worry about it. But then I thought, well, let me at least see what he's saying, right? So
Sure.
I dug in, and I'm reading through it, and I didn't agree with most of his points, but then I noticed that his blog was named after the road that I was on in the North Shore of Kauai in Hanalei Bay, and the dude who wrote the blog article was literally 1,000 feet from where
No
I was.
way.
And so I contacted him and I said, don't worry, the Rest Mafia didn't send me, but
Right. But I'm here.
let's get together and have a beer. And he was open, but schedule wise, it didn't work out. But
Okay.
that kind of crap happens to me all the time. Like the time I got to explain the semantic web to Dr. John McCarthy, or have a cigarette with Kurt Vonnegut. These are all stories that
See this
I'll tell people over a beer in person.
this is what I mean by you're one of those people who somehow has a career that's longer than you've been alive, and there's just all these random things where like, wait, you did what? Where? How is that possible?
Just last night, a Twitter friend that I know from a college friend tweeted about somebody that I went to a young writers workshop after 8th grade in, who's become a very successful writer now. I watch Long Now videos, and my high school art teacher is mentioned. Could have something to do with the fact that he hangs himself by fishhooks, but
I'm gonna pass on that one. That doesn't seem like something I want to try. But hey, to each their own. To each their own.
yeah, it's been a long, weird life.
Well, I mean, that's better than a short, uninteresting one, right?
Indeed.
So, what are you reading these days? Are any book recommendations? I'm always looking for books. Anything exciting
Yeah.
out there?
Yeah. Let me get this up. I've been reading. obviously a lot for research for my book. If you're interested in WebAssembly and Rust, Kevin Hoffman's book is a fantastic introduction. But beyond that, I'm going back and rereading Dune, the Dune series, prior
Nice.
to the movie, whenever that's going to be, 2021 now, I guess. There was I've been a sustaining member of the Long Now for quite some time. And recently there was, normally members get access to the streaming seminars that they would run at the San Francisco Jazz Center in San Francisco. If you're not familiar, it's an organization founded by Stuart Brand and Brian Eno, Danny Hillis. I'm blanking on the names, but they're promoting long-term thinking, and as a symbol of long-term thinking, they're building a clock designed to last for 10,000 years. But they have a series of seminars that they run, usually in person, but now with the pandemic, they're streaming them all. And Roman Krasnarek, I can't remember exactly how to pronounce his last name, just did a absolutely phenomenal one called Being a Good Ancestor. And it's a way of, it's a framework for thinking about how to think about the future, in the sense that, we're all very interested in having representation, right? We don't like taxation without representation, but there is a lack of representation from the future, right?
Sure.
As we are making decisions or not making decisions appropriately, of an economic or ecological or social nature, there aren't advocates for the future, and so it's a framework for thinking about how to spur that kind of thinking. But he tells these great stories about how, in other parts of the world, there are people whose job is to, in essence, advocate for the future. And
Sure.
in Japan, there's a municipality that nominates people to be like on a committee representing the future, and they even have like special robes and stuff that they put on. And anyway, so I'm reading his book. It's called The Good Ancestor: A Radical Prescription for Long-Term Thinking. Really, really recommended. It's very eye-opening. But let's see what else. Other than that, Isabel Wilkerson's Cast, fantastic, beautifully written book. I, with the George Floyd situation, I've done a lot of research into anti-racism literature, and it's eye-opening, it's jarring. It's something I encourage everyone to dip your toe into, at least, because it's time.
Yeah.
Right? It's time to address these issues, and so I've spent a lot of time spelunking various books there. Read a lot of James Baldwin, and oh my God, that guy can write. he's become one of my favorite writers, and I love Ta-Nehisi Coates' writing as well. His brother was a coworker of mine, and so I used to go see him read poetry as a 13-year-old at Borders Bookstore in
Awesome.
DC, well before he became who he is. So I've been doing a lot of that. I haven't started yet, but I'm going to go back and reread Asimov's Foundation series. It's been a while, and particularly with Dune as well. I read them so young in life. They're very different coming at them later in life.
Yeah, totally.
So I don't know.
We should brag a bit about your book. So what do we got going on? When's it going to be out? When am I going to get a tech review copy?
Well, so I'm writing the definitive guide to WebAssembly for O'Reilly. It's actually going to be made available early access soon. I don't know
Sweet.
exactly the dates, but it's only a couple chapters so far, but it's scheduled to be next June.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of great WebAssembly books out there already, but none that are comprehensive, and that includes thinking about it outside of the browser. So most people's understanding of WebAssembly is grounded in what's called the minimum viable product, which was established in February of 2017 or something. And that alone is mind-blowing, right? In my talks and classes and things, one of my favorite things to show is an SVG diagram of a hourglass, and the sand in the hourglass is positioned in through an animation sequence. So an embedded JavaScript in the SVG is calling into a physics engine written in C++ to position the sand, which are DOM elements. And, you know, if that's not a slap in the face that the world is changing,
Right.
and that our notion of the web needs to be modernized to include, you know, I mean, it really, WebAssembly is the promise of write once, run anywhere with about 30 years of experience. And right. I think it's going to kill the desktop. I think it's going to kill the JVM. Not Java, I don't see that there's going to be eventually. I mean, the JVM is still a better virtual machine. It's had more years of optimization and research in it, but I don't know that people are going to want to support multiple runtimes, and one runtime runs on computers and the other runtime runs everywhere.
Sure.
And so you'll laugh, but one of the things that I've been experimenting with recently is netkernel in the browser. So this is
I've heard you bring up netkernel a few times in my life.
Yeah, well, it's about to fulfill its vision, running in the browser in ways where you're going to see some very, very, very cool stuff, like
That's awesome.
literally mind-bending kind of stuff. Now, what they've done is they've recompiled the JVM or the Java code that it is using a compiler called ChirpJ. It works remarkably well, but it will more naturally ultimately require, I think, a microkernel rewritten in Rust or something like that.
Sure.
But you know, just where there's no native code anymore. Things are portable and safe and fast and can run in a variety of environments. And so I'm highlighting all these things in the book, including like WASI environments. So WebAssembly itself gives you code portability, but WASI is going to give us application portability because applications are built against APIs.
Right.
That's why Windows applications couldn't run on Linux until the Wine project ported the Win32 API, and .NET can't run there unless there's mono. That's kind of equivalent to what WASI is going to do. Initially, it'll focus on threads and processes and files and things like that, but eventually we'll see WASI interfaces for 3D graphics and cryptocurrency and encryption. And you'll write again. This gets back to my earlier point. You don't want to write code that is aware of the fact that it's in a browser or not in a browser.
Right.
So what you want is to read from a file and have the browser emulate a file system, right? Whether it's in and out of local storage or serializing that out to your S3 bucket. The application isn't going to know or care where data is coming from. Again, with 5G, right? Ubiquity. And code really will there will be a computational fabric, and we're seeing that play out. And it's not going to be a compromise. It's going to be safe. It's going to be fast, and it's going to be portable.
Well, I think part of what I hear when we talk about this is just what we even mean by the term computer has changed so much in our lifetime. And you think about it isn't just this tower or this laptop, it's your phone and your watch and your car, and software, my original phrase obviously is eating the world. And it's just going to be really interesting to see what that looks like over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 years as this stuff just seeps further and further into our lives.
Well, the real shift beyond the software that's coming at us fast, and I don't think most people realize, and which is again why the completely portable code and things like LLVM are so crucial, is notions of IT sovereignty. We don't trust each other from a technological perspective, right? We have, one country doesn't want to run products from another country in their military system because they don't know if there are backdoors or
Right.
that kind of thing in it. So there's a move in Europe, in India, and in China to break away from dependencies on Western architectures. And so coincident with that desire, we see the emergence of things like RISC-V, which is to hardware what open source has been to software. And, right now, Intel and AMD are struggling. The Air, the new M1 Air, outperforms last year's x86 Mac Pro. And so the shift towards ARM, both by Apple and Microsoft, is obviously a big shift. But I think it's going to go beyond that because ARM still requires a license fee, and RISC-V is going to provide a modern, efficient ISA with no license fee.
Sure.
And so again, we're seeing India get into manufacturing of silicon technology now. China has obviously always been there, but they're pushing forward and developing their own chipsets. And I think we're going to see subtle variation, regionally between the instruction sets and whatnot. But that's again where something like LLVM is going to be crucial,
Sure.
because the back end will just emit whatever it needs to run in whatever platform. We don't have time to write code that's aware of these distinctions, and so.
Right.
Obviously, RISC-V is not there yet in the consumer side. It will start in microcontrollers and whatnot. But I just attended, thanks to the pandemic, the RISC-V Global Forum a couple months ago, and was just astonished at how much activity there is at a global scale right now. So hardware is going to become a bigger part of our lives. And we're going to have to think about FPGAs, ASICs, GPUs. The Fukuoka computer is currently the fastest computer in the world. And they're not only having more chips, but they're putting like gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of memory on chip.
Sure.
Right? So memory bandwidth has become one of the biggest slowdowns in our industry. But that's also then how we tie back into like IPFS, because between on chip to first level cache, second level cache, main memory, paging on disk, network fetch, these are all orders of magnitude slower. We're now establishing things that work orders of magnitude slower than networks here to think about, well, we're sending people to the moon in 2024. We're going to establish 4G connections of some sort, to them. We want an internet that works with people on the moon. We want an internet
Right.
that works with people on Mars. And that's part of the vision of the interplanetary file system is that it will continue to work. And, obviously you need to address latency, but they are well on their way to doing it. And so, it's never been more interesting to be a developer because, it's not even a question of language or runtime. It's just every aspect of what we do is changing underneath our feet as we speak. And the good news is, I think we're getting better. So,
Well, certainly our building blocks are getting coarser grained, which is good. We're not writing our own compilers anymore. We're not writing our own operating systems anymore. But to your point, I think that's part of what I love and loathe about this industry, because there's always new toys to play with, and the challenge for us is keeping up with that. One of the things that I thought about when we first started chatting, what techniques, tips do you have for keeping up with the industry?
number one, don't have kids.
All right. Well, I've already failed on that one. Sorry.
No, I mean, it's that's ultimately the message I'm trying to convey now in my talks, right? And that was ultimately the message of the modern software topic suite that I came up with. It's beneficial to both developers and organizations to think longer term, to think longer term about the software that we're building. So when you'll be able to write a solution in pretty much any language you want and compile it down to WebAssembly and make it available as an ES6 module, nobody cares what it's written in. So there'll be less pressure to have to constantly rewrite stuff. And so these technologies that I mentioned, WebAssembly, LLVM, Rust, linked data, IPFS, these are all technologies that as developers, I think, are going to have legs. And whether it's these technologies or something else, pick things that have legs.
Right.
Because otherwise, you're going to be chasing JavaScript frameworks, and those get thrown away annually. And don't provide a lot of business value. So for developers, I'm trying to help them identify trends and things that they can sink their teeth into. And for organizations, it's time to get off of the treadmill where you hire somebody, they're going to change everything a year in, they're behind, they get fired a year later, start again. Right?
Galapagos Island problem.
We need to make progress incrementally, and I actually the weekend of the Snow Fluff in March in Minneapolis, I had kind of a beautiful mind moment, right? Where I was actually
you weren't going
concerned
crazy, right? You didn't see people that weren't there, or
I was concerned. I was concerned I was having a psychotic break because suddenly all of these ideas connected in my head, and I called up Matt Stein and I was like, tell me I'm not crazy. And he's like, you're not crazy, but you should write a book. And so we, I've been trying to tease that apart. And WebAssembly is really the first part of that. And so that's where I'm starting. And it occurred to me over the summer that I actually have kind of a Marvel cinematic universe approach to this, right? WebAssembly is Iron Man. And so I'm introducing him first. And then pretty soon, Thor and LLVM and linked data, and I'll introduce them as individuals, and then I'll tie them together in some kind of Avenger narrative, and that's amount as much effort as I think is going to be needed to do so.
Sure. Well, and one of the things that has occurred to me as we've had this conversation is these technologies, when they first come out, they get a lot of attention. I remember back when you and I were doing talks in like HTML5. And of course, the sad part was we had to tell people, well, you really can't do a lot of this unless you're on this Edge browser, you're on this brand new browser, the latest and greatest version. And by the time this stuff becomes ubiquitous, it isn't interesting anymore. It's not driving everybody at a conference to show up at your talk. But that's when we can actually start doing cool stuff with it, is when it starts to kind of disappear a little bit. And it's just a tool. It's just here's my Phillips screwdriver, my flathead screwdriver. What's so cool about that? Well, you're doing cool stuff with it now, and you can actually solve real world problems instead of, just having these hypothetical conversations.
So look at TensorFlow.js. It makes no sense to do machine learning in JavaScript in the browser, in theory, except for privacy reasons, because if you're trying to detect the onset of dementia or something, you don't have to worry about HIPAA if you don't take the data off the device. So you then have like WebRTC as a permissioned way of getting access to the video camera, which you then hook up in about 10 lines of code to an HTML5 element, video element, which has hardware acceleration of the video stream. You have machine learning frameworks that get access to the GPU by way of WebGL. So you get hardware acceleration to make it possible. There's now a WebAssembly backend that's basically as fast and ubiquitous, but all these things just work together because they are problem-space solutions. And I guess the main guidance that I would have is stop being so solution oriented, right?
Stop solutioning me, as my wife likes to say.
Well, just we solve problems with what we know, and those are not always the right way to solve problems, right? So find technologies that are forged in problem space thinking, and I think that's a common theme for all the things that I've mentioned.
Nice. Well, Brian, I can't believe we're basically out of time here, and we didn't talk about sous vide. I'm amazed by that. You and I'll have to have that conversation privately because I think that's something I'm gonna have to do this winter, to be honest with you.
It's worth it. It seems like it's fancy snooty cooking, but it's actually very easy. It produces excellent results, and it's not all that expensive to get started. Anybody who's interested, go check out the Chef Steps Joule. It's a little device you can control with an app. You can put it in any pot. You don't have to buy like a separate container or anything. And it's just a way of getting good consistent. Um,
Well, as our good friend Brian Getz referred to it as, it's a rice cooker for meat,
mhm.
and that gets my attention because I like meat and I like how easy the rice cooker makes it to cook perfect rice. So, yeah, I
But
think it's gonna happen.
my wife makes excellent queso with sous vide as well.
Your wife
So
makes excellent everything. And this is what kills me about pandemic time is I haven't had any opportunity to come, just invite myself over to enjoy the feast.
the door is open to anybody who wants to come visit. So
Oh, well, we'll definitely have to do that in
post
2021.
pandemic,
Post pandemic, once you have your vaccines all up to date, that you'll be
That's
allowed
right.
in the home. But other than that,
That's
we'll
right.
just have to live vicariously through your Twitter stream. Well, Brian, thank you so much for hanging out with me, my friend. I really do appreciate it. And as always, you've opened my eyes to some very cool new stuff that's coming, and I know you'll help us get there. So thank you so much. How can people, hear more of your brilliance over the next 6 months, year?
Um, I mean, the easiest way is just on Twitter. You just have to put up with pictures of food and dogs, but I try to have a lot of good content as well. So just B Sletten, Sletten. But I'm the like I said, the book will be early access through Safari soon, coming out next June, and I'm actually contemplating doing some blogging. So I'll announce that through those channels as well.
Outstanding.
So,
Well, I follow you mostly for the food, so that's why I follow you on Twitter, and your wife for that matter. But all right, well, thank you again, Brian. I appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for hanging out with us today. We've got Dahlia from JetBrains to be joining me here next week. I'm very excited for that, and we're gonna do I think 3 or 4 in a row here before the holidays. I got a bunch of good guests coming up. Those will be out on our website, and I hope to see you all next week. Cheers, everybody.
thank you.